This episode of Q Point Podcast is pre-recorded, produced and sponsored by Karina Quirk, broker at Next Home Experience.
Different views.
I know your story.
From different Q's.
Incredible job.
He's David Quirk.
You brought it up.
And she's Karina Quirk.
Imagine.
This is
Q Point.
Now joining us in studio is Republican Maine State Senator and gubernatorial candidate Jim Libby. Welcome to the program.
Well, thanks for having me. I love it.
Yes, Jim. Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
You're a Republican candidate and you are running with clean elections. Explain that.
Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot for giving me the opportunity to explain it because I think people will be happy with the response. I've been in and out of government 6 different terms, 4 in the Senate, 2 in the House, and I've been involved in a lot of other campaigns and community service organizations all over the state, really. What my feeling has been over the course of that entire time is that people complain a lot about the influence of money in elections. Especially during COVID, we heard a lot from people, for example, nurses or people in healthcare that actually lost their jobs because they didn't want to get the vaccine and it was a experimental drug and that sort of thing. And so you get this feedback from that and many, many other examples of why do we let big pharma have this much influence? Look at the money that's pouring into Augusta from these big companies. And I'm not going to name a lot of the companies, but I'll say big pharma and I'll say communications. And so the great thing about Maine is they have a Clean Elections Act. When you run for governor, too, and you accept this taxpayer money, you also have to raise some of your own, but it has to be from an individual. That seed money, the cap currently is $100. And a lot of donations at $100 doesn't add up to a whole heck of a lot. But then you go out and collect 3,200 seed money checks for $5 each, or you get that online. You work with people and the state system. But when you're done, you do get an allocation, and it comes from the taxpayer, and people should know that. But what's great about it is that I get to report back to the taxpayer without taking any special interest money at all. And that has been my goal. And that's why in 2002, when I ran clean elections. Now, every time I've run for the legislature, 6 times, I have run traditional. Why did I run traditional? Well, the first thing I noticed was you got all these candidates. We're talking about a few hundred candidates running for the legislature, but leadership can just run traditional. They can have their own PACs, and they're the ones that set the agenda. And they're getting a ton of money from the same groups I was just talking about. So I just prefer, if you're going to have that, just don't even have clean elections in the legislature. So the first thing I would do is my opening 2-year budget. I'm not going to fund clean elections. Now, the law might say I have to, but we're going to, in the budget bill, there'll be a change in the law. Well, how do you do that? You know, it's something that people want. Well, yeah, and they voted for it. I'm going to make the legislature vote on that and bring it back to the public so that they can understand what the heck's going on. They have it both ways. They're able to take from any industry. The lobby's up there for a reason. I mean, we get lobbied every single day that we're there by many, many, many lobbyists. And they especially concentrate in the Senate where I've been the last 4 terms. And I know them all personally, and they're actually great people. They work really hard and they provide incredible information. But I'll never forget the time that I had this bill, and it was an environmentally friendly bill. We used to have MTBE in our gasoline. I don't know if you remember that way back, right? So I was completely opposed to that. And I was after Angus. Angus, come on. You know, you're an environmentalist, I thought. Come on, let's go. So it passed in the House. We're going to get rid of MTBE. It passed. So I went and sat over in the Senate and watched the vote over there. I lost by 1. That didn't bother me. But what bothered me was I looked up at the vote tally and I saw one of my co-sponsors decided they were going to vote against my bill. One of my co-sponsors. So I never said anything to that person, but I did go down to ethics and election practices, and I opened up the book and see where the money came from, all the donations, and I found out exactly the information that I thought was the case. And so I feel strongly about it. Why would we have a system like that and just waste it like we are? So here's our opportunity, and I hope that people understand what I'm doing, why it's my goal. It's a goal to be the first governor. I was the first governor ever to use clean elections in the United States. There were a couple of other people that year, but we qualified first. There was a Green candidate, for example. And I just think that it has at least the potential to change a little bit of the decision making. It only takes a few people in the legislature to tip a bill one way or another. And I learned that the hard way. So that's why I'm doing it.
What do you think about the budget being close to $12 billion now?
Yeah, it's terrible. But of course, I've been in the Senate kind of sitting on my hands. I vote no against all those budgets and I just see them pass. I think what's the most interesting when you compare, okay, well, what can you say about the budget? I can say we took in more revenue last year, but we passed a lot more taxes. And does that really make sense? It doesn't. The download tax bothered me the most. I was able to block that as a member of the taxation committee the session before. That came up the session before. And I thought for sure it would hold too. When people download movies and music and all that stuff, and now they're subject to a 5.5% tax, even what we received for a revenue projection from that to the state, I thought was low. We did a back of the envelope calculation and we thought it was closer to 30 million than the 14 they projected. But then there were all these other taxes that went up, paint tax. And if you want to go fishing, you got to pay more. If you think about that, here's the budget rising by, if you look at the whole 7 years of the current governor's term, it's risen by, it's unbelievable. I think it's really important to state that it won't be as hard to rein in the budget as people think, because there's a ton of revenue coming in. And I have a tax plan that lowers income tax, for example, by $1 billion in the first 4 years of my service. And I'm very excited about that. But I also have some other programs. And we're going to be able to do some of that from the increase in the revenues. We'll have to do some real cuts, right? But there's going to be an increase in the revenue over the budget for the coming biennium.
Well, right now isn't a carryover to raise the taxes to 8.95. And then if you add the Family Leave Act of another 0.5%, you're at 9.4. I understand that it's income-based, but the conversation Corinne and I had a few weeks ago with a candidate, they kind of forget if you're an S corporation and you're a pass-through account, you're actually paying taxes on that even though you're not taking the money, because that money might be used for inventory or construction of your business or whatever. That I think a lot of these people who are in the legislature forget that there are businesses out there that are trying to survive.
Yeah, I know that. So the first thing that I would say is that part of the reduction in the income tax that I'm seeking, right, is a reduction in the rates. And the only time that I'm aware of whether we've had a reduction in the rate, I led that effort, and we reduced the sales tax from 5.5% to 5% when I was in the legislature. And we bargained to get that. Governor King came in and said to the Republican caucus, what are your top 3 priorities? So we told him, and he went to the Democrats and he asked the same thing. And he tried to achieve all 6. Which I thought was a pretty good way to govern at the time. And I didn't know what to expect out of King when he first came in. Well, I've got a track record. I think I'm the only person in this Republican field that has served in the legislature. And as a result of my service, I truly understand the budget. So, for example, we had a candidate recently say, I'm concerned about property taxes. Well, I had just finished talking about the importance of property taxes. And we had a bill to triple the homestead exemption. I was on the bill, and it was a Democrat bill, and I thought, well, maybe we got a chance here. There was a Democrat that was the lead sponsor. Then we found out how much the bill would cost. We have to keep the towns whole, to cut the check from the state. But then another candidate came in and said, well, we should increase the homestead to $400,000 of exemption. And I'm thinking to myself, that would be almost the whole amount of income taxes that we take in. I haven't done the full math on it yet, but I'm going to. I like to tell people that because I've got so much experience in business, government, education, sports management, you name it, I've been in everything. And I've raised a family here, and I was born here. I'm a 14th generation Mainer. I think that I'm going to be able to do the job better than anybody else. I really do. So I try to tell people, hey, here's my background. Here's my platform. Take a look at it. It's all online. I think you're going to like it. And the only thing you need to do is get to know me, especially up here in Bangor, because I'm from Southern Maine. I'm going to do very well down there.
What will be your top 3 priorities as governor?
We should talk about lower taxes, but at the same time, Maine should be a constructive place to live. What I've had the good fortune of doing over the course of my 64 years here is I've noticed how people really care about their community, and I've been a part of that, and my wife Jenny as well. And even my 2 kids, I've got them involved. So the tax reduction is really important. But what is also important, so it's not just, by the way, income taxes, but I do have a plan for property taxes. I do want to increase the exemption by about 3 times, $75,000, something that I think we can do. But we should also talk about in the legislature, and always signed by the governor for some odd reason, we constantly change the regulatory environment. So if you're trying to build a business plan and you have to forecast the next, let's just say 3 years of costs and revenues, How are you going to be able to do that if we're always changing the environment? So the one thing that I want to guarantee is that I'm not going to allow that to happen. Now, let me give you a real good example. We have a really lousy setup with energy in this state. So we're favoring solar. And I like solar. I'm fine with that. I'm not sure how I feel about wind. Solar's okay, but we have these 5 megawatt solar farms, and it's in law. We're going to favor them, and the ratepayer is going to pay a higher amount for the wholesale of that energy that comes out of the 5 megawatt facility. It's going to be buried in a contract, this private contract. All right, so there's one problem that we're paying, but here's the problem about the regulatory side of it. So then the legislature heard all the complaints, and they decided, oh, well, we'll assess fees on the solar farms and take some of their profitability away. So we don't have just one mistake, we got two. We got one mistake where we're asking ratepayers to foot the bill for, again, energy policy that we all believe in clean energy. We all do. But there's hydro. We have natural gas, and that is not exactly dirty. We have propane, although we don't make it here, and I wish we did. There are companies in Maine that use biomass facilities to generate their own electricity, and some people are against that, and boy, I'm not. We had a company come in and buy one lumber mill in my district, and I was thrilled because I think they want to start a biomass facility there, and it's a great idea. Absolutely, we should not be saying no to these things, because why should we be dependent on energy coming down from Canada? And why should we spend all that money on a big swath of land? We're going to cut that when we could be producing our own at the local level and creating jobs. So I'm going to keep the regulatory environment relatively level. It's hard to put that in a plan. You just have to tell people we're not going to change tax rates unless they're going down. In terms of the heavy hand of government, one of the things that I'm going to use as a criteria is if the legislature created the problem, I'm not going to create another problem by trying to bail them out. They deserve to own it. And we can help in other ways. I see more legislation now out of the 2,000-something bills that come through there. I see more legislation. I'm not sure what the percentage is, but it's like half the bills are bills to repair the mistakes that the legislature made in the previous session. It's unbelievable. I was on the taxation committee. That's where I saw it the most. I've served on the education committee several times. I don't like what I'm seeing through there either. Back to the constructive part, I believe that man-made things can really enhance a state. Even though it's because I miss covered bridges, I'm going to have a covered bridge program in the DOT, and we're going to create a couple. I also think we need a much better way to communicate about what a great agricultural state we are. So I really want to create a very large, high square footage agricultural center. And when I do, I'll probably come to you and say, hey, would you like to advertise in there for a certain period of time? Because I'm going to need some capital. It's not all going to come from the taxpayer. But I went to one recently in Louisville. They have the best ag center ever, and they have huge convention. I mean, you can do way more than a convention in this place. I went down there and discovered it because my daughter played basketball, and she was pretty good. And she was on the Firecrackers team and the Maine attraction team, best players in Maine. So I was pretty excited about going down there. Well, we went in this ag center, and they had 111 basketball courts in the same place.
Wow.
111 basketball courts in this center. So I invite anyone that's listening right now, I invite you to look up the Ag Center in Louisville, Kentucky. You're going to be amazed. They have fairs in there. Of course, they're famous for their horses. They have stables all the way around the thing. I mean, it's just beautiful. What do we have in Maine for a great square footage? I remember when Governor King got elected. I like McKernan. I really do. He was a great governor, in my opinion. But when King came along, I wanted to support him. So I went to the celebration that he had after getting elected. And all he could figure out was, I guess we're going to have this in Brunswick in an airport hangar because there's no square footage in this state. And that's what he did. And they tried to heat, they had all these tents and tried to heat it. And it was kind of a mess. I want more for Mainers, but projects like that can involve businesses that care, they're definitely doable. Hey, I work at a college. I've been at Thomas College. This is my 24th year. And we build all the time. We're lucky because if we're building a res hall, then there's some beds and we put some people in those beds and we can make some money for sure. But we also have gotten the help of Harold Alfond, for example. I remember when Harold Alfond came in, I met him. I was really impressed with that guy. because he came in and he told us how he made his money. I think he's pretty much, in terms of that deal that he made, one of the smartest deals I think I've ever seen, selling Dexter Shoe like that. And
Right, to Warren Buffett.
Warren
right?
Buffett. And I think Warren Buffett was quoted as saying it was the only bad deal he ever made or something like that. He came in and, he told us, I got $5 million. We can probably do this, but you're going to have to raise $5 million. Well, at the time, we never even raised any funds at Thomas. This was our first campaign. A guy named John Joseph and I, we took care of the faculty side and former faculty and acquaintances of theirs. And I don't know, we raised 150 to 200,000 somewhere in there. And then we had all these other people raising money in kind of small amounts. And we got to the 5 million. And since I got to work for Lori LaChance, and she is like a gravitational force for fundraising. And I invite anybody to come to the Thomas College campus. The 24 years I've spent there to turn that tiny place into what we have now, it's just unbelievable. So I'm very proud to have worked there. And during that time, boy, have we grown. We have incredible athletic facilities, artificial turf fields that all high school use. We have a separate athletic facility for tennis. It's unbelievable. Our academic building was also an Alphon building. They helped us there. So I really want to include businesses in what we do at the state level, as opposed to what I think is the opposite right now, to be honest with you, to be brutally honest with you.
Well, that's another reason not to continue to raise taxes on businesses, because they do give back to the community.
They do. But watch out, because there's more taxes coming if we don't go a different direction. And that's what I'm here to provide, is a new direction. There'll be a lot of pressure on nonprofits in the state. And a lot of the nonprofits that I know about and work with, they give back to their local fire departments, and they do all of that. I don't know if we need to pass new taxes. Even one Republican candidate said we need a VAT tax. I had to point out to him, look, I've been a senator representing these New Hampshire border towns for years, and they don't have a sales tax. If we do that, yeah, you might be able to get rid of the income tax, but that's the wrong approach for Maine. We're going to have a tough time if we do that. All the businesses are going to move to New Hampshire or wherever. There's huge differences between some really good candidates and myself, and people that live in southern Maine know me. I've won 52 towns in a row, 52 in a row, and I have 13 towns in my district. I've got great support down there. I used to have a different Senate district, so there's a lot of other towns that I don't represent now that I have great support in. Savings equals investment. And the problem that we have here in Maine is that there isn't a lot of savings that's generated within Maine. And that's just because, okay, well, where does savings come from? Disposable income. We take all the disposable income with incredibly high taxes, and we leave people unable to really be in a position to go to the bank with a business plan and try to start a business. And we need a lot more of that. We need a combination of investment coming in from outside of Maine, and we need people that want to start businesses here. We need to enable them. I love economic development. I know one of the bills that I was able to pass was the business equipment tax rebate program. And King agreed with me. Again, thank God that he did. So here in Maine, we used to go into all these businesses and take a look inside the building, all the things that were owned and used, and we taxed it. We were one of only 14 states at the time that had that personal property tax, King, he actually agreed. We met a few times, and then I got together with his chief of staff. We put this bill together, and we decided we couldn't eliminate the tax because it's a local tax, right? Property tax is a local tax, and they're actually guaranteed that you'd have to have a 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate to get it through and so forth. So we created a rebate program, and it did, I thought, help to germinate business and get it going and have some expansion. I thought we had some pretty good luck in the 90s and early 2000s. I was very proud of that bill. Yes, I was. And it was all based on this principle that we're going to let markets open up for people. All they have to do is identify what's missing, create some kind of a product, and fill that gap. And Mainers are very intuitive, very intelligent. They want to be able to do that. I think we put out more roadblocks than almost any other state in the United States. And I hate saying that because I love the state. One time we had a company that wanted to come in from Boston to the greater Waterville area, CGI, and they did. They came. They wanted to make sure there'd be enough labor. And as a college professor, we have like a job placement guarantee at Thomas. So a lot of people come to us because we're able to supply labor. And these are good kids. They're not kids anymore either. They're ready. So anyway, this guy from CGI at the time was the CEO, and we're sitting around the table. Yes, we're going to be able to do this. We sent our professors to his business. Then we trained our kids. So the whole thing was great. But we asked him, I'm glad you want to grow. We're so glad you want to come to Waterville. Why do you want to come to Waterville? Why do you want to come to Maine? And he was like, because I like to ski. The truth about Maine is that we have the greatest natural resources in the world. We have mountains. We have rivers. We have an incredible coastline. We have everything we need. It's a beautiful state, and people do want to come here. And one good thing that I thought was going to happen from COVID was that when people started to realize that they would be able to work from home or something, and we started getting all these people moving up here, buying homes, and there was this little surge in real estate.
I know firsthand as a realtor.
Yeah. I wish, though, that everyone could do that, and not everyone in Maine can even afford a home. People starting out have to build their equity. And again, I want somebody in the Blaine house that understands how to build equity. Think about how you built it. Think about how people you know built their equity. It really started with the home. It didn't start with automobiles. Now, I love your automobiles, but in terms of holding value, the home is the place to be. And as you said, real estate values have increased. They've increased throughout time for decades and decades and decades. Now, we go through periods, and you remember the housing crash that we had. Everybody remembers that. Sometimes it happens, but we always bounce right back. And of course, we diluted the American dollar. We created more dollars, and we diluted the dollar. And that means you got to pay more dollars for homes. Well, the problem with that is people can't afford the down payment. There's too many people that can't. Now, some people can. There's some pretty good money in the state, don't get me wrong, but it's really tough. And what we've done to seniors, you think about this one for a minute. Some senior that has toiled their whole life and should be proud of all the things that they've done, sitting in a home that doubles in value, and they can't pay the property tax because the state allows towns to factor up. If they're behind, they factor it up, or they do a reval every 10 years. Some places do it every 5 years. And now, my valuation's gone way up, but the mill rate hasn't gone down much. And the next thing you know, these people paying $3,000, $4,000, $6,000, $8,000. I'm talking about seniors that can't afford this in a single year. And then what do? I hear from everybody as a state senator. And I get to go visit them, and I do my best. But the answer is not state assistance programs. That's not the answer. We'll never win that way. Money chasing more money by raising taxes and trying to take care of this problem by passing out money, that is just not going to work in this state. I'm sorry, but it's just the truth.
I was reading an article a month or two ago, I believe in the Bangor Daily News, that says that now there's 400,000+ on MaineCare. Yep. And we all know that we're not paying the hospitals back on that MaineCare. And I guess if the state of Maine doesn't pay it back, either does the federal government. Yep. What can you tell us about that?
I can tell you a lot about it because I spoke on the floor of the Senate. I was one of the few. And this is what I do for Maine people. I take a lot of licks. I stood up and I first started with, back in 2019, following some decisions by the federal government, we decided that we were going to expand the use of Medicaid in the state. And there's actually a line called the expansion line that has a lot of people in it. Some of them are single, and they're young, and they're able to work. And here we are. If you look at the purpose of Medicaid, it's to help people that are in need. But the governor came out with a press release that said, and you can find it online, it's easy to find, that this is the greatest thing that we could possibly do is expand MaineCare. Okay, let's evaluate that statement. First of all, if it's a backdoor approach to single payer, we're in a lot of trouble. And it is. It was backdoor to single payer. But what happened was, as New Hampshire stayed at about 180,000 people, and they've got more population than Maine by a little bit, but as they stayed with their 168, we expanded to 420,000 people. Now we're around 400,000 people that have a MaineCare card. And there's a lot of problems with that. The first is that the MaineCare reimbursement rate is often lower than cost. It used to be 70%, and during COVID, they rose it for a while. But still, I think it's terrible that somebody who is using MaineCare in need is considered in our healthcare system kind of a second-class citizen. And some healthcare providers that are out in the field don't accept Medicaid. They don't accept MaineCare. Well, why is that? Well, because of the reimbursement rate. So that's something we have to work with the federal government on. And what I want to do is build a coalition of states to bring this to the president and say, hey, look, we can't have this vicious cycle where we end up putting ourselves in the poorhouse. And let me really describe that well. I want to make sure I describe it. The more people that are on state assistance through Medicaid, the more the price increases in the field of healthcare only go to the private pays. That is a vicious cycle. Now, then the other problem is, and I've been to talk to pretty much every hospital CEO in the state, And you know what they do for legislators? It's kind of great. They color code their budgets for us. This one's black, this one's red. So we knew about the 3 hospitals. We were lucky we had an outside investor buy Bridgeton Hospital, Central Maine. There were 3 hospitals. They were in the red. So, that investor wants to come in, shake up the company, try to make it work. And we went to Maine General Medical. We went to Portland and Biddeford. And they made money one year, they lost money 1 year, and they were right around a 1% return. When you add to that the poor reimbursement that we have for 400,000 people, when you add to that you're not going to pay the hospitals on time with those insurance payments, no wonder they're closing. Of course they're closing. It's not just hospitals. We don't have birthing centers around the state. All these outreach operations that are asking us to do something about MaineCare. Well, this is what has to be done. Somebody has to be willing to say, okay, we're going to transition people, especially in that expansion line, transition them, even if it's a 2-step process, into the private sector. We're going to work with companies and reward them for carrying health insurance. And we're going to slowly dig ourselves out of this hole. It cannot happen in 1 year. And any candidate that says it can is wrong. But over 4 years, we're going to dig out of it. And we're going to stop those closures. Especially because I work at Thomas College, when Inland closed, that was a disaster for us in Waterville. And it just frustrates me to see that go on around the state. And I feel like people, maybe they have big hearts, but they don't realize when they expand MaineCare like that, it creates dependency. So what else has happened, unfortunately, and we can talk about this later, but it's also exacerbated the drug problem. I go to drug houses. I work with towns that are trying to do something about there are flop houses out there. There are people who are on MaineCare and get some other assistance, and so they can sit around and do drugs all day. We think of the work we're going to have to do to help these people. We need to help them. There has to be a life raft that they can jump on. And I actually have people working on my campaign that have been through drug rehab. I think they call it a lived experience. In order to really understand the problem, we have a really good man who is a lobbyist up in Augusta, and his daughter has put on our website her story. She has gone through all of that, the terrible overdoses, major health problems, and she's fighting her way back. She took me to a recovery rally recently, and we got a lot of work to do. And honestly, some of it is generated from poor policy making. I have a PhD in public policy. It drives me nuts to see this, and especially when other states are doing well.
Thank you for joining us for part 1 with Republican Maine State Senator and gubernatorial candidate Jim Libby. Make sure to tune in to part 2 tomorrow, Sunday, October 12th at 6:30 a.m. on VOM, the Voice of Maine.
You've been listening to Q Point.
Follow us at qpointpodcast.com or on your favorite streaming app.
This is where you can get the news from the people who make the news.
Make sure to join us next time.
We hope you tune in.
Q Point Podcast invites guests and candidates from all parties to join the conversation. The views, information, opinions, and comments expressed during this program do not necessarily represent those of the host, Q Point Podcast, associates, affiliates, and CQRE LLC.
Thanks for being a part of the conversation. Catch every episode at qpointpodcast.com or wherever you stream. Tune in and tell your friends.